You know, there's this collection of ancient texts, some of them thousands of years old, that have this almost uncanny understanding of what it means to be human. They talk about the mind, the body, consciousness, with a kind of precision that sounds eerily like some of our latest discoveries. And that's led a lot of people to ask a really big question. I mean, how did they do it? They didn't have labs or computers or the scientific method as we know it. So was it all just a string of lucky guesses? Was it some kind of divine revelation? Or, and this is what we're going to explore, was there something else going on? A kind of hidden method, a pre-modern science that we've just completely failed to recognize? Well, we see the results of this method in systems you've probably heard of. Take Ayurveda. It wasn't built on some abstract theory. It came from generations of people paying really close attention to what makes us sick and what makes us well. And the Yoga Sutras, they're not just philosophy. You read them and it's like looking at a lab notebook about the inner workings of the mind, all built from directly observing things like attention, breath, and our own mental loops. These weren't just ideas, they were grounded in reality. So, what this all points to is something fascinating, that there was a real architecture behind all this wisdom, a rigorous process for finding and protecting truth that was in place for millennia, built on its own very distinct pillars of strength. Let's break this down. First, everything was observation first. They didn't start with a theory or an equation. They started by looking right at the human system. Second, this knowledge was stress tested, not for a few years in a lab, but for centuries, even millennia. Bad ideas, the ones that didn't actually work in real life, they just got thrown out. Only the useful stuff survived. And third, and this part is absolutely crucial, it was all filtered through this incredibly powerful system of oral transmission. Now, this completely reframes how we think about oral tradition. We tend to imagine it as a game of telephone, where the message gets garbled over time. But in the Vedic tradition, it was the exact opposite. They had strict rules for meter, for precise phonetics, and group recitation to cross-check each other. It was basically a biological computer running a data verification system, a kind of redundancy and checksum protocol. This wasn't about telling romantic stories. It was about preserving data with the highest possible fidelity. A bad piece of information just couldn't survive a filter that tough.
And that points to a really fundamental difference in approach. Modern science is brilliant at reductionism, at isolating one single variable to test a hypothesis. The ancient method, though, was all about systems thinking, modeling how countless different things like diet, sleep, emotion, even the seasons, all interact with each other. Now, that makes it less useful for, say, acute surgery, but it makes it surprisingly powerful for the chronic, lifestyle-driven conditions that modern medicine sometimes struggles with.
Okay, so if there was a real method, why does it all sound so mystical? To get that, we have to learn how to read the code. The language in these texts wasn't just poetic, it was incredibly functional. Think of it like a form of ancient data compression. For example, take a word like prana. To our modern ears, it can sound like some kind of magical, mystical gas, right? It's a huge barrier for a lot of people. But what if we stop trying to read it so literally? What if we start treating it like a compressed zip file that just needs to be unpacked? Because when you translate prana not as a literal thing, but as a systems concept, it suddenly maps almost perfectly onto a whole cluster of modern scientific ideas: breath, oxygenation, our metabolic energy, the activation of our nervous system. The word prana isn't the thing itself. It's a pointer to an entire interconnected process. The precision wasn't in a long explanation. It was baked into the symbol itself. And this idea is everywhere in these texts. The doshas in Ayurveda, they're not literal substances floating around inside you. They're names for regulatory patterns in the body. Chakras and koshas, you can see them as interfaces, like a user-friendly dashboard for the super complex human system. Even the gods, Vishnu the preserver, Shiva the destroyer, you can read them as elegant encodings for the fundamental cyclic processes that govern everything. It's kind of like when we say, the market is angry. We don't actually think the stock market has feelings, but that metaphor carries an incredible amount of complex, useful information. Which brings us to the really big question. Why does any of this still matter? Why do these ancient observations still hit so close to home in the 21st century? The answer, it turns out, is surprisingly simple, and it has everything to do with us. This one sentence is pretty much the key to the whole thing. The software of our world, our tech, our societies, our culture, it's getting updated constantly, right? But our fundamental operating system, the biological and psychological hardware we're all born with, that has stayed virtually the same for millennia. I mean, just think about it. The way our attention gets grabbed, the nature of desire and fear, the basic mechanics of how habits are formed, our deep need for sleep, how our bodies react to stress, the way we navigate social hierarchies. These things are timeless. They don't change. The ancient texts are focused squarely on these unchanging parts of being human, and that's why their psychology can still feel so spot on, while their astronomy, well, not so much. Now, let's be intellectually honest here. We have to be crystal clear about the limits of this blueprint. This is not some secret ancient science that predicted quantum mechanics or anything like that. Believing that is a very modern mistake. We have to know where the model ends. This is where the distinction is absolutely critical. When these texts are read as literal physics, they just fall apart. Their descriptions of cosmology, their maps of mythological lands, their timelines for creation, none of these things hold up to modern measurement. These parts belong to the world of metaphysics and cultural meaning, not testable, falsifiable science. And we have to add one more layer of nuance here, something called selective survival bias. Part of the reason these texts seem so wise is because the really accurate ideas, the ones that genuinely helped people live better, get repeated and passed down. The inaccurate ideas, they tend to get ignored or reinterpreted or just forgotten over time. That whole process acts like a lens, amplifying the stuff that works. It's not magic, it's just evolutionary pressure acting on ideas. So, after digging into the method, the language, and the limits, how should we actually approach this incredible body of knowledge? Well, we can put together a final blueprint, a new perspective for understanding its true place in the world. This framework gives us a pretty clear guide. This wisdom is most accurate and most useful when it's dealing with the direct, observable realities of our own biology and behavior, when it's using that systems thinking approach, built on generations of observation. It becomes inaccurate when we, the modern readers, make the mistake of seeing a symbol and thinking it's a science, or reading beautiful poetry and thinking it's a physics textbook, or when we replace the need to test ideas with simple faith. Ultimately, this might be the most powerful way to think about this entire library of ancient wisdom. They are not textbooks of the universe, trying to explain black holes and distant galaxies. A better way to see them is for what they really are, a profound and time-tested operating manual written by humans for the human organism. And the question that leaves us with is, what might we learn if we finally started reading the manual correctly?